Welcome to Earth Mysteries. Today we're off to Cambodia to visit a very important and a bucket list sacred site, Angkor Wat. We had the privilege of going there in February of 2024, and there's so much reconstruction happening there, as well as the build-up of tourism. If this is something you can do fairly soon, I suggest you do it. But let's look at some of the mysteries that I discovered alongside watching for the interesting information that I'd learned from Graham Hancock's books. Let's go. So the actual Angkor complex covers over 400 square kilometers. And although we're going to look at certain of these temples during this video, you will see there's many more temples to be discovered or to be seen. But it is a vast area, and we spent 3 days doing this, having a wonderful tuk-tuk driver and guide. And I would recommend taking a tuk-tuk driver because it is very hot and very humid. And it was wonderful to have that breeze as we drove along, as well as him giving us plenty of water, which we needed to drink, certainly. Now, the name Wat actually means temple. According to Graham Hancock, he thinks Angkor actually has a relationship to the followers of Horus from Egypt. I'm not going to say that's right or wrong, but it's a very interesting concept because he ties many of the findings in Egypt to Angkor Wat, even though they were spaced out over a different period of time. I think I want to say up front that even though many of the temples that we saw built in sandstone, which was a shame because many of them had darkened because of the weather conditions, the humidity, he believes that even though they were built in the early 12th century AD, they were following a plan that went back 10,500 years BC. So that's why he's tying Egypt and Angkor Wat together. So let's just come back to this present day, and this Angkor Wat temple was built by a Khmer king who was primarily Hindu, so he dedicated this temple to the Hindu gods Vishnu, Shiva and Brahma. And I like this overview, which I managed to get because it actually gives you how you can see it's laid out. There is a huge moat that surrounds this whole area, as you can see. And our own guide said, oh, it's to keep the temple afloat. I wasn't convinced by that theory. There's also that entrance which is in the west. And again, people tie that up to, well, the Hindus believed that when you died, you went into the west. These are just suppositions, I'm going to say. But there in the middle, you can see the temple complex itself. And Angkor Wat is said to have been built as an earthly replica of the cosmic world in stone, which is just a magnificent way of thinking of it. As you can see, this is not a picture I managed to get because it's the perfect picture of a reflection on one of these reflective pools in front of the temple, but it just gives you that magnificence that is there at Angkor Wat, and this is why people have seen it as so beautiful and certainly an amazing architectural achievement. So as I say, Graham Hancock thinks that this followed a design, and the design he thinks it followed was highlighting the Draco system, the Draco constellation that is, of course, the dragon or the serpent, and it was seen specifically in the sky 10,500 BC. At the same time that Orion also was seen in the sky. Whether this is true, I like that idea, and as you'll see, there are many references to serpents and dragons as we go along. It truly is an architectural masterpiece. The precision in which it was built really shows just their understanding of math, harmonics, geometry and astronomy. I'll show you this as we go through. And it's believed that when you walk through this temple, it's like walking through a mandala to enlightenment. And it brings harmony to body, mind and spirit. And this is still a Buddhist place. This is still a place where Buddhist students live and the initiates live, and you'll see them walking around. So there is this sense of understanding that this is a place of prayer and enlightenment. Now, there are 5 towers to the main area, this main temple, and these towers represent Mount Meru, which is seen as the abode of the gods. And they are shaped like lotus buds and covered by tiny lotus buds. It's the idea that the lotus is taking you to that place of enlightenment, that opening of the lotus eventually. And the highest central tower that you'll see in the center there is actually seen as an axis mundi, which is an interdimensional doorway to eternal realms. And we find that similarity of axis mundis in other sites, such as in Easter Island, in Cusco. All of these places believing that they are aligned to the tree of life that goes right down to the center of the earth mother, the heart of the mother. And if you go down there, then you will experience the sense of enlightenment, but really eternal life. So it's almost like returning to the source. And within Buddhist and Hindu cosmology, Mount Meru is known as the palace of the Vedic god Indra. And I had looked at this because I understand that it was understood there was a net covering this palace, which had jewels throughout it. And those jewels represented the interconnectedness and emptiness of everything within the universe. In other words, when you went to one of those places where the net met and there was a jewel, if you could connect to that jewel, you could see everything of the universe. You could experience eternal life. Now, the king that came later, a little later on into the 13th century, decided, because he had lost a few wars, that the Hindu gods had failed him. So he built a new city called Angkor Wat, and he dedicated it to Buddhism. We're going to look at Angkor Wat later. But what I wanted to say is that as you walk around Angkor Wat itself, you'll see there are Hindu images and Buddhist images. And this feels right. It doesn't seem to be that you have to honor one or other. You make the most of everything you've got. So there you see Buddha on one side, you see a Hindu in the middle with all these wonderful dancing ladies, and then again a Buddhist image. Now, Angkor Wat consists of 3 rectangles reached by a narrow causeway across the moat. And I was so pleased to find this picture because when you're there, it's really hard to see the plan. You're at ground level, and I have to say, because there's so much reconstruction and even rubble lying around, it's really hard to see what was going on and what they were deciding this should be. So I'm giving you this lovely map because I do like maps. You could say there's a 4th rectangle there around the moat, but there's the first rectangle entered through the causeway, through the entrance point. There's a 2nd rectangle, and then that 3rd rectangle that represents the temple complex itself. And as I was considering walking across the causeway across the moat to the entrance, it really reminded me of the stories about Glastonbury Tor and the Isle of Avalon initiation. If you've been to Glastonbury, that you've seen the Tor, but it was believed that around the Tor at many times of its existence, there was water. And that when you went to the Bridged Well and that area of Beckery in Glastonbury, you would take a boat across to the bottom of the Tor, the base of the Tor, and then you would climb the Tor through the labyrinth way of doing this until you reach the top. And I just got this sense that this same crossing across the moat was asking me to leave behind old identities, leave behind the past. And I think it was really set up in that way, not just to have a moat, although moats are seen as having very strong magnetic energy, but it also, I think, it symbolizes dissolving the past, leaving things behind. Now, the shorter sides of the rectangles that you've been shown align exactly to true north, and I was so excited. This picture you have here is from my compass. And every time I laid the compass down, along the shorter sides of the rectangles, I'd find it was at 0 degrees north. Now, how did they manage to do that? And this is connected to the rotational axis of the Earth rather than the magnetic axis of the Earth. So you just imagine the Earth rotating on its axis, and where we point, where in the north where it points, is what we call the polar star. And then there's obviously a south pointing. So it pointed directly to the polar star and what we call true north. Now, the inner rectangle consists of 3 levels. Again, I'm trying to give that concept of, it's interesting, it's 3 and 3, but the first level is on the ground level, and I'm going to show you the corridors that are on the ground level covered in these bas-relief images. Second level has got 1,500 or 2,000 asperas, which are celestial dancers, everywhere. 2,000 of them. And there's also these interesting Tibetan wheel light windows. It was the only way I could describe it, and I'm going to talk more about that. And the third level has those 5 towers. So there is a series of steps that you climb to get to the third level. So here's the main picture again. And again, you understand I like plans. So there's the entrance to the causeway, and the causeway crosses the moat. So this is this idea that you may be letting go of the past, stepping through that. And at the main entrance, which actually has these wonderful serpent balustrades, you actually can't see the towers. So when you first walk into Angkor Wat, you're like, what's this about? And you can't see anything more because that main entrance is so large. Then when you go beyond that, you get into this grassy area, and you have what they call libraries there, and I'm going to talk about these libraries, and then these reflective pools behind the library. Then you reach the second rectangle, which is where these long corridors or cloisters are found, and then you get to the third rectangle, which is where the towers are. And you'll see those lovely green coverings, which is really where the reconstruction is taking place. They're doing a great job, but unfortunately a lot of it has to be replaced by cement, which is therefore losing a lot of the energy that should be there. And here I am, eventually there at the very beginning, and here I'm in front of that wonderful 7-headed naga, which represents creative power that emerges from nothingness. So there's a lot of symbolism about coming out of nothingness, returning to nothingness. And there are also symbols of lions and symbols, I think, of a lion on that left, but very much an idea that the serpent and the lion are intertwined in this journey. So here I am, again, this big map just showing you, I walk across that causeway and I come to the entry tower, which is entering that first rectangle. And here I am in front of that entry tower. Again, just wanted to give you a sense of it. The video shows you just how vast that area is, but it's achieving, and you can see how so many times the sandstone has been worn away, but you can see that there was so much design put into these different towers, and many of them again representing serpents. And now I've moved beyond that, and I'm now in this grassy area of a causeway, and now I can see the towers, and I can see these libraries in front of the reflective pools. And they're calling them libraries, and I'll show you a picture a little later on, but they really are not libraries. I mean, why would you call it a library? When you walk into it, there's no evidence of books or even scripts. And I think the library very much represented not a place of experiencing information in the way we might talk about a library. To me, the library contained so much energy, especially in the one I'm going to show you a little later, that it was, again, you were being downloaded with information that came from the level of astronomy, geometry, mathematics, etc., vibration, sound. There was a lot here about sound and vibration. So I feel these so-called libraries were libraries of vibration of sound, of light. And when you walked into them, it was to experience that as a download of information from a vibrational level of consciousness. So here we are in the second rectangle, and this is, to me, it is amazing. And I was just blown away by how long these corridors were. As you can see, once again, I aligned them to the compass and found it was 0 degrees north facing of the true node. And what surprised me even more was these cobbled roofs. And nobody had described these before. You could have built just a rectangular roof, but no, everywhere in this temple they built these roofs, which I've seen in other places such as Turkey. I've seen them in Malta. I've seen them in England, where what you do is you build the stones together to build an arch. And it's a very skilled job, because if you don't get it right, everything above that roof collapses in. So you have to have exactly the right stones, exactly the right angles to make sure that you can bring this into this awareness. And I think that is fabulous to see that happening. And what this does is it actually builds electromagnetic energy, vibration. And I was just blown away that they had spent so much time on building these roofs. And then you get to the stage where here you see that roof and you see the stones underneath. Again, people would just say, oh, they're just paving stones. But they actually were very specific, as I'm going to describe to you. And the third part was that when you look down, you may not be able to see this, but this was like a trapezoid doorway, I should say. I think you can see that the horizontal at the top is smaller than the horizontal at the bottom. And it isn't just my camera experiencing that. Again, I've seen that in other sacred sites. It has a geometric shape. You could say 6:5. I don't think this is a 6:5 ratio. But basically, when you take ratios like this, and I didn't have a measure to find out what it was, you're literally creating a new vibration, a new frequency. And to me, that is so exciting that that happens. So once again, just to show you this, and these corridors, I call them cloisters as well, because it felt like walking like a monk around these, or a priest, or whatever priestess. It just felt magical. And I thought, no, these were built to walk and to sound and to bring frequency in and to be lifted up. And where the corridors crossed, I looked up, and here it forms a cross, a most beautiful cross. I mean, to build this in a roof is magnificent. I know I'm going on about this, but I recognize that I probably was the only one looking up. But when I looked down, there was often a single stone, maybe a square stone, underneath this cross. And when I sounded, and I'm sorry I couldn't get a video of me sounding to make it show you this, but there was heightened resonance. So they understood the power of resonance. So every time you came to a crossing of corridors, you looked up, there was the cross, looked down, there's a single stone, you stood on that stone, you toned, and could feel my energy rising. Now, all the corridors were covered in this bas-relief stories, and again, it's magnificent to see this because there are different ways of doing it, but you can see it's almost like you allow these figures to stand out from the rock in which they were carved. And all the stories were supposed to inspire you. There were many battle scenes, which I wasn't so inspired by, and stories of elephants and etc., which were probably there in the 12th century. But this certainly is the story of the churning of the milk, and we'll see this again. It's a very sacred story, and I will be doing a separate video just for this. But it is the story of two different groups who came together, and this was what we call the divas, because you can see their headdress is very fancy. And then you have the other group, which are the Asuras, and they're supposed to be the baddies, but I don't see that. I just see them two different ways. And they both wanted to achieve enlightenment, and they said to Vishnu, well, how are we going to do this? And Vishnu says, okay, each of you is going to hold on to this snake, this serpent, Vasukya, and you are going to pull alternately. And as you pull alternately, you're churning the sea of milk, and the sea of milk represented the ocean of possibilities, the unknown. And when you churn it, you'll bring to the surface everything that is to be brought into our lives as spiritual experiences. And here you have that, you'll see that this sea underneath, and at some point what they were churning against was Mount Meru. So the serpent had been wound around Mount Meru, they're pulling on this, and suddenly the Mount Meru starts to sink, so Vishnu brings in this turtle, puts it underneath, and stabilizes Meru. And this really is telling us that there's times for self-reflection, times for stabilizing ourselves with our foundation of who we are. But ultimately, you'll see above the image here is that you reach enlightenment, and you have all these little figures up there which represent your enlightened self. So it's a beautiful story, and it is a Hindu story, but it really ties in with so much we know about our spiritual journey. We have to work with our dark and our light. We have to have times of self-reflection. We have to face what comes up from the underworld and deal with that. We have to face our own glamour of, oh, look how good I am. And then we experience enlightenment. As simple as that. And now I'm up at the second level of the temple. And here you have these 1,500, someone said 2,000, another, these celestial dancers. And also what I call these Tibetan wheel light windows. I couldn't understand why they would spend so much time making this design if it didn't have meaning. I mean, there were a lot of these wheels, and they were all made of stone, so they didn't turn. But on the other hand, they were there. And just here's these wonderful ladies, and they're beautiful designs, and very specific. And each of them, you could almost say, were unique in their design. Beautifully done. But what I believe, and you'll see here that these figures were between these, I'm going to call them celestial Tibetan wheel windows. I think that the ladies represented the movement. They produced the movement that produced the movement to the wheel. That's just my theory. But I'm not sure why you would really put all these celestial women, 1,500 of them, dancing, and they were seen as dancing ladies, just for the pleasure of the king. And I don't think this king was particularly bothered by grandiose ideas for himself. So that's just my theory, that there's something about the movement of these, the understanding of the imagination, where these ladies are moving the energy. They move these Tibetan wheels, which move the energy of our creative energy towards enlightenment. The very use of Tibetan wheels in obviously other countries. And now we're still on that second level. Once again, I'm sorry to be going on, but look at this. This is so magnificent. This is such a magnificent arching. You can see there the roofs with these lovely cobbled roofs. And here's another one. And again, the trapezoid-shaped doorway. And it's just, again, not my way of taking this picture. And then these steps up. I think everything was designed with such precision to understand this. And here's the library I'm mentioning. And I went into this library, which nobody else was going into. It was like, okay. The energy was so strong. So it feels like what they call a library would be a place of meditation, a place of reflection, a place of expansion before you went to that next level, because at the moment we're on the second level. And here we are. We're climbing up to that third level, and honestly, I think this was the biggest highlight for many people. I shouldn't be exaggerating or saying that, but it was all about, oh my goodness, did you manage to climb those stairs? Oh my goodness, I had vertigo. Oh my goodness, it was so hard. That's fine. That was their experience. But as you get to that next level, you have this wonderful Buddha sitting on the Naga serpent. Again, there's a whole story about how the serpent surrounded the Buddha with all its coils, and then when it unwound, here you had the enlightened Buddha. I like that story. And then you have the view back. Here's me going back to the second level, and then the third level, or I should say the first level, is beneath that. You can get a really sense of just how vast this is, but how much of it is really not used or not considered for tourism. And here we are, we're up at the central sanctuary, which is this main tower, Mount Meru, surrounded by the other mountains that make up the whole complex of Mount Meru. So each corner had one of these lotus-like towers on it. And of course, I'm more interested in what are these bathing pools doing up here? Now, nobody mentions them. This is called the Central Sanctuary. But there are 4 bathing pools that are at the corners of this central tower. And they are clearly bathing pools. You're meant to go into them. Obviously, there's no water there, but there's a stepping down and there's energy going around this. And it reminds me of different sites that I've been to, certainly those in Turkey and others, where the rituals were to go into these waters. And the waters were sacred, and there was often a serpentine energy involved, but nobody talks about them. So I think that this was for ritual. I think these were really important, but as I say, they were like just something you had to walk around for many people because they were in the way. We're nearly finished at Angkor Wat, and I went to sunrise, and there's my central picture of sunrise. And really, because the sun has moved, and it was February when we visited, the sun did not rise over the towers. I think I could have positioned myself so I could have seen that, but most people, and I would have thought there were certainly 1,000 people there when I went, were wanting to take this picture, and I was one of them, but what I saw was that the sun wasn't going to rise over the tower. And as I was walking back to the moat, I get this amazing picture. Here's the tower, here's the sun rising. I'm now back at the moat, and I was just blown away by the magnificence of the sun being reflected in this moat. And I hope that you're experiencing that. It was just a feeling of being so open and ready. And just, it's a peacefulness, it's an awakening. And it is something that I will always remember. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of focus on getting to somewhere for the sunset. This is a place that most people, again, had gone. They only allowed 300 people up there. So we climbed up there for the sunset. But once again, I kind of felt that this wasn't going to give me the picture that I wanted, the main picture. So I came down, and here we go again. I was blown away by the beautiful sun setting this time in the west on the moat. And I just felt so good to be able to see this. It just felt, I've never seen anything like this. So whatever was in the water that made this so reflective, I don't think it was particularly the sun. And as we often say, there's a good sunset or sunrise where there's a lot of pollution. This isn't a polluted area. There's very little industry here. So this really is very powerful, the way in which this imagery shows up. I hope you're enjoying it. Now we're just going to move on for the last piece here to some of the other sites. First of all, Angkor Thom. Angkor Thom is often seen as more beautiful than Angkor Wat. The word means the great city, and it was built now by this Buddhist Yaman, the 7th, he was the one who said, I think the Hindu gods have let me down. So he built a more Buddhist site. But again, you'll see that much of it is Buddhist and Hindu. And this piece is called the Bayon, which is seen as the heart of a vast area. And for Graham Hancock, he sees this like a step pyramid, that central tower, surrounded by at least 25 other towers, representing a yantra or a specialized mantra allowing advanced meditation. He sees this as the heart of the Draco system or the Draco constellation that I described earlier. I think this certainly could be true. It's hard again to get this picture because you've got to be a little higher to see that. But I like the idea of that, again, step pyramid. Maybe again it's Mount Meru, but the idea of this yantra, this bringing you to the new level. Now here is a different picture of it, and you can see again lots of reconstruction. There's that central tower, and what we learned is that central tower was covered with gold, as were the other towers. And there were golden lions and golden Buddhists. I mean, it must have looked spectacular. Of course, all the gold has been taken, so now you don't have that. But on each of these towers is this face. And there are 4 faces to each of the towers. Now, it's described as the face of the Buddha. Other people say it's the face of the Kaima ruler who created this. Other people say it's a face of something else. I like the idea of the face of the Buddha. So you've got all these towers, and I was trying to count them, but there are an amazing number, and each of them has these 4 faces. So you've got a lot of faces that are representing, I like to think, the Buddha. And this is probably one of the best known towers that's taken. I'm sorry it's a little dark, but that's just, again, unfortunately it is dark because it's gone black under the conditions. And once again, this is what is known as the south entrance of Angkor Thom. There are 5 main entrances, 4 aligned to the cardinal directions. The 5th one goes to the original palace, which again no longer exists. And these are sandstone. The central tower is surrounded by the 4 faces, possibly again, of the Buddha. So let me just go back. So here are the 4 faces. Inside that entranceway is again cobbled, and I think these are magnificent. And on one side you have these 3 elephant trunks plucking at a lotus flower. There's a lot of references to elephants that certainly were in this area at that time. I'm not going to give any more relevance to that, but it's interesting you keep seeing references to elephants as well. Now, I'm just going to focus on this again so that you can see that this churning of the Sea of Milk, which again is a Hindu story, was very much part of Angkor Thom. This is magnificent in the way that these figures look. I'm sure some of them have been recreated. But this is primarily on the south gate, and the other gates, the figures have disappeared. And so this is really the most important one. So you have the 9-headed Naga here. And as I said, what they were told, Vishnu told the Devas and the Asuras that you're both going to hold on to this serpent, this Naga, which is wound around the tower that you saw. And then you're going to pull alternately to churn the milk. So you can see that what they're churning is the moat of Angkor Thom that's showing up. And here are the 54 Devas. And again, you see that fancy crown, so you know they're the Devas. I mean, great faces. Great faces. And then you have the 54 Asuras. Once again, I think they look calmer than the Devas do, and they have a different headdress. And here I am standing, looking at the tail of the serpent, which is being pulled. And here's the moat of Angkor Thom. Now, just a little bit of figures here. Angkor Wat is 72 degrees east of Giza. This is Graham Hancock's work. So he believes that this was significant, that this was placed in this degrees. Now, why is 72 important? Because it takes 72 years for the precession of the equinoxes to move through 1 degree. So 72 times 360 makes you have the complete, what we call the great year, of how long it takes for the wobble of the earth to pass through the whole of the zodiac. So 72 is a very important number for many, many cultures, as I've seen around the world. So you'll see 72. Now, if you divide 72 by 2, you get 36. And if you add 36 to 72, you get 108. And 108 is seen as the path of God that allows us to leave behind earthly desires. And why I'm saying this is there were 54 divas and 54 asuras, make 108, churning the milk. And I want to just say throughout, again, many civilizations, we see numbers of 54, 72, 36, 108. And all of this tells us that these different cultures actually understood the precession of the equinoxes, which takes something like 900 years. And one has to question, how on earth did they know that this was true? How did they know about the precession of the equinoxes in a lifetime? So this must have been information given to them by the cosmic beings, ETs, etc. Now, just finally, 3 others. Taprom is known to have Angelina Jolie acting out a scene in Tomb Raider. And everybody went here to show what it felt like to be Angelina Jolie and doing this scene. We, on the other hand, were just there. We did not try to act anything out. I think what is magnificent to see is just how the nature, these trees, are taking over the temples and reclaiming them. And I think that that's something is just amazing to see. And it brings something more to the temples, to me, than anything else. Originally, this was thought to have been constructed to be a monastery and a university. I think this is just information that may have been passed down from the 12th century or 13th century. Priya Khan was also built by that same Khmer ruler, and it is said it served as a massive administrative headquarters. Who knows? So you've got the lions at the front, you've got this great entrance. Again, you see these similarities appearing. And unfortunately, they decided to cut the tree down. This was, okay, the tree took over and they cut it down. I wasn't too sure our guide wanted to show us this, but I was like, oh, what a shame. Let the tree take the temple. And I think this interested me. Our guide kept saying, oh, they drilled holes so they could move the stones around. Okay, but there were an awful lot of holes here in some of these rocks. I wasn't sure what this was about, but it always makes me interesting when things are not as I'm being told, as you can understand. And what was interesting in this place were these lingam plus vaginal uterus rocks. And this, so comes from the Hindu traditions. You see a lot of lingams, but you see that already in this uterus, in this vaginal area. And then, this one was very specific and very fancy. And they were all in this particular temple. But what was interesting is that above, again, Christine looks up, above were these amazing entry points. Again, sorry about that. I got excited. You see these cobbled roofs and this light entry point. And what I had just learned or heard about was that in India, they are now thinking this lingam plus this vaginal stone and this light above was to do with creating a battery. And that when you poured water into these areas, which you can see are very accessible to having water, so there was something about the sunlight coming in, striking that lingam, affecting the water, sending energy into the water, creating a battery. And to me, that makes more sense than just saying they really just wanted to keep putting lingams and vaginas everywhere. Now, the last place is Neak Peen. We went there. It's a long walk in. And the key to this is there's this temple built for a wife of one of the Khmer rulers. And this is a horse. And of course, I had to say, why is there a horse there? But I came up from Graham Hancock's work with the understanding that the horse represented a rescuing of souls. So I was quite happy with the horse being there. Until then, I wasn't. So we have completed our journey. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed journeying with me and with my husband to see all these wonderful sights. And maybe one day you'll visit. I wouldn't leave it too long because I think tourism is going to just take off in this area. But I hope you realize that when I'm doing these videos, I'm really connecting us to everywhere around the world. It's like this net that said there were people who understood the grid, the earth grid, the net, and they built different places on this net to wake us up to who we are. Different energies, different places, but ultimately to bring us to the state of eternal wisdom and knowledge. Until next time, bye-bye.